Hello programmers, Spidy is back with one another video. In previous video we have started a SageMaker tutorial series. So into that video I have explained how you can create a custom scikit-learn model in AWS SageMaker and deploy that model as an endpoint. Endpoint you can consider as a API. Now we are going to create API gateway, means we are going to create a REST API for machine learning model that we already created in last video. If you have not seen this first video of SageMaker tutorial series 1, then first watch this video and then come to this one. Okay, so let's see the flow how we can going to do. So just let me open my notebook. So this notebook is for tutorial 2. So already tutorial 1 notebook I have explained into the previous video, right? So what we are going to do in this video is we are going to create a REST API for SageMaker endpoint. See, creating REST API, why it makes sense. The example is in previous video we have created SageMaker endpoint, right? Now if you are working into the production, you have some application or Android application or whatever application it is, every time calling a SageMaker endpoint within your credentials using Boto3, that creates a lots of dependencies issues, right? That is a fine. Even in last video I show you how you can create a SageMaker endpoint directly as well, but this is not an optimal way. We should have some REST API, so that we are going to create, right? So in this video we are going to create a REST API. For this we are going to use a two AWS services. One is a Lambda, second is API Gateway. Lambda is a serverless service of AWS that you can consider, and API Gateway is a service. Into that you can create a REST API, WebSocket API and different types of API within a one click, right? So currently now in this video we are not going to create a custom API using Flask or Django or whatever framework it is. We are going to use the API Gateway of AWS. So I hope this flow is clear to you, right? So now without wasting time, let's get started, right? So we are going to see the flow. Yeah, so just let me back to my notebook screen. So this is the initial step that we need to follow. So first of all we need to have the SageMaker endpoint. See, so what I am going to do is I am going to my tutorial 1 notebook and running this notebook once again. So I already run it and maybe in few minutes endpoint will be there. So yeah, training is completed. Now endpoint creation is in procedure, but I have made a few changes into the training script. If you don't know what is training script, so I request you to go to first video and see how I created all those resources, right? So in last video I told you about inference function. Now we are going to create a REST API. So for REST API we should have some inference function according to our use case, right? So if you know the API, in API we have the few content type, which is a text CSV, application JSON, application NumPy arrays. There are lots of you can use, but in current situation I am going to use a text CSV. So with this inference function I am going to only handle text CSV kind of data. If someone is passing the CSV kind of data to my API, I will provide a response, otherwise I will raise the error, something like this. Please use content type text CSV and send a response. Okay, so what I am doing is in input function I am taking all the data as a string, means as a CSV, and then I am converting into the data frame. That's how I can convert using string IO, that will convert our string to data frame, right? So now this input function data frame will be passed into the predict function, and predict function will do just like model.predict a data frame, and it will return the prediction of batches. If you have provided 10 number of the rows, 15 number of rows, so that responses will be provided by the predict function, and predict function will directly pass that into the output function. So we have not given our output function, so that will treat as a default output function. Obviously there are 4 functions: model function, predict, input. Yeah, so that's how you can. So this is nothing, only few changes I have made to this script. Even this code I have already provided into that notebook, but at that time in previous tutorial it was commented. So I hope that my endpoint is deployed now. Now my endpoint will only consider a text CSV because I want to create a REST API. Yes, it is created. I am going back to my inference and checking the endpoint. Yes, endpoint is available into the service. Now according to the flow, what should I have? So I am just going to the tutorial number 2 notebook. Now first task is completed. Now second task is to create a Lambda function. Yes, I need to have some Lambda function. So Lambda is nothing, a serverless service for you Lambda function is very useful if you have some compute power, if you need compute resources, but lambda function limit is only 15 seconds. If your execution is more than 15 seconds, then this will not work for you, but in API most of the cases will be into the second, so this is fine for us, right? Okay, I'm just going to create a one lambda function. My lambda function name I'm just giving it default, like SageMaker Endpoint Invoker. Runtime you can choose Node.js, but I always love to write code in Python, so I'm just choosing a Python. Change execution role, so I would suggest a create new role with the basic lambda permission. Yes, create a lambda function, so that will take a 1 minute of time. Yeah, so now in your mind one question will be that why lambda function, why not only API gateway? The reason is that API gateway only can handle the API gateway can't handle your processing and other stuff that can be handled by the lambda. See, lambda is a compute power, so if you are giving something to lambda will make the pre-process and send you back that result. So we should have some compute power attached to our API, so that's why we are using lambda, not only API gateway, because API gateway can't do all those things. API gateway only can treat as API, it's just like a mediator which is taking the request from the user and sending the response from the services. Either it can be lambda or either it can be Fargate or other AWS services, right? Now my lambda function is created. So by default you will get this lambda function. Okay, I'm just increasing the screen size so you guys can see it. So this is a by default lambda function that you will get as when you going to create. Now I'm going to use my own lambda function that I have changed. So this code I will explain it. So this is the function. Here I'm just making a paste of it, right? So we need to have the few libraries like import IO, Boto3, JSON, CSV. So Boto3 is to invoke the endpoint. See, then runtime Boto3 client, runtime SageMaker, because we need to invoke the SageMaker endpoint, so we should have the Boto3 access. Now this is a lambda handler, so this is a pattern of lambda. Your functions or your code should not be out from this. You should work in always lambda handler. So lambda will take an event. If you don't know how lambda works, so lambda will trigger at some event at some time. So that event it will capture event and context. What is the context? What is the event? So that will capture by the lambda function. So what it will do? So example, my API gateway will take the data from the user. So that data and all other event will be catch here in event. Now that's all the CSV data will be treated as like it will load the JSON, and from that I will capture the only payload data, which is useful for us because there will be lots of information that I will show you. And now all this payload data means the CSV data that I am going to create a runtime environment for SageMaker endpoint. So runtime.invoke endpoint. Invoke endpoint is a method to invoke the SageMaker endpoint. Now we should have the endpoint name here, content type which is text CSV that we already created in function, and body should be the payload data, which is this. Now we'll get a result. We are just loading that result and decoding it and creating a dictionary for the result and sending back the response to the user. So response dictionary status code 200. If it is success, body means your result, and return response dictionary, right? Now I'm going to deploy this function, guys. Don't forget to deploy whatever things you have written. Deploy. Now we can't test this lambda function because it's work with only event. If I'm going to test, otherwise it means if it will do nothing, because there is nothing is attached to this lambda function as of now. Now we need to have some few configuration here. Now according to this our lambda function, we are taking endpoint name from the environment variable. We are not passing statically. So I'm just copying this ID here and going to configuration, environment variable. We should have some environment variable, and in this environment variable I will give the name of my endpoint. So this is my endpoint name, value be here, save. So now when the lambda run, it will automatically check this endpoint name from environment variable. It will take from directly here. So this is a best practice. Always don't provide a name statically, right? So this is done. Okay. Now next thing, if let me back to the notebook. Now we need to have some policies and permission that should be attached to my Lambda function, right? Because currently my Lambda, if you remember, I created with a basic execution role. So you just copy this, come back to Lambda function, once again go to the configuration. You just need to go to there are lots of options and sometimes I confuse. Yeah, you need to go to the permission, click on execution role, that will redirect into the IAM tab. Now we need to attach that policy that we copied, so it will redirect to like a basic Lambda function policy. Okay, so what here I can do, attach create inline policy. I will just need to click on create inline policy, click on a JSON because I have already created ready-made JSON. Remove this, paste new one. So if you can see in action, we are attaching SageMaker invoke endpoint permission. Resources star means it can invoke any endpoint, but here we also can be specific for our endpoint only. We can give the only our endpoint name, but that is not needed as of now. I am just reviewing policy. So it will just make a high level review, it is correct or not. I should have some name, endpoint invoker create policy. Yes, so now this policy is attached. Now my Lambda function can means it can call to SageMaker endpoint. See, you can see now two policies are attached. So now my Lambda function is fully compatible to call the SageMaker endpoint. Now the most interesting part is to create API. I am going to the API gateway now. Just search API gateway into the console. Now close this IAM tab. So according to this flow, we are done till step 3, step 2. Now in we are following step 3, create a REST API in API gateway. Here lots of options are available: HTTP API, WebSocket API, REST API. I am going to create a REST API. Click on build API, create, just leave as it is. Click on REST. Here click on new API, not example API. My API name should be dev API endpoint. Okay, this is the name. Description I don't need to this will be regional API because everyone can use create API. Otherwise you can choose a private API, age optimized, but as of now we are making it as a regional API, create API. So this is API gateway console. Few things you need to accept and learn here, because might be this is you are not familiar with API gateway console. So now my API is created. So this is your API path. Now we need to create a resource in the sense, if this is my API like example.com, right? Now I should have some, after slash I should have some resource like test or like dev. So that's what we are going to create in API gateway console. So click on create resource, name it as a whatever you like. I like a dev. Other things you need to leave it as a default, create resource. Now for resource I should have some method, so click on resource, then click on create method. I like to have to my API which should be post. Click on distick, done. Now integration, now it's most important configuration. You should integrate your Lambda function, with this API. So I'm just clicking on Lambda function. Use Lambda proxy integration, yes, click on this. Lambda region is obviously AP South 1. Lambda function name here we need to mention, so I forget whatever name I have given, SageMaker Endpoint Invoker. Okay, I need to name just here, so you can see it suggests default timeout. So API gateway default timeout is 29 seconds, so we are going to use the similar only, ACO. Now you are about to give API permission, invoke your Lambda function, just click on OK. Okay, now we need to make the few changes, means few tests here, because before deploying API we should check it, is it running or not. Okay, so in this right panel, in this left panel you will see that some test button. So now our API is almost created, we are going to test it. Okay, so we need to pass some CSV data according to our machine learning model, and we'll see we are getting a proper response or we are getting some error. So just let me open my Postman, because body data is already there in Postman. Yeah, so as I said, we need to click on this test button, and other configuration as of now we don't need to give anything. Request body we need to only give, so that's why I open a Postman here. So I'm just giving this response body. So this body is just where this is just a one kind of, you can consider one row of our data set. That model is trained. Now I'm passing this to in the request body, and let's test it should work or not. Let's check. Yeah, status we got a 200, prediction is 3. So this prediction 3, it simple means our machine learning model was classifying the mobile price, so that I explained in the tutorial 1, that you can check. Okay, so as of now you just need to focus on this working. Okay, so now my API is working. Okay, now how, if you want to check your Lambda function logs, because all the logs will be into the Lambda function, so go to Lambda console, click on monitor, view CloudWatch logs, just click on this button. So if you don't know what is CloudWatch is just like a command shell, not a command shell, but it is a log viewer you can consider. There are lots of functionality of CloudWatch. You can create a alarm, log groups, and there are lots of another functionality as well. But as of now we are going to check the logs of my Lambda function. So my latest log you can see 1134. I'm going to click on this, and this is my Lambda function log. Here you can see start, and then if I'm going to back to the code, I have printed the payload data only. So you can see into the logs of the payload data, whatever we have sent, that is printing here. So start report means the request is over, right? So that's how you can check, even if you are getting some error, so that how you can track error from here. So all the error or success logs you can find from the CloudWatch. You just need to click on the monitor, and then it will redirect you to the CloudWatch logs. So now I'm happy. I test my API, which is working fine. Let's give the multiple data points. I'm just making copy paste, so every time I will get a 3. Let's check. Yeah, so you can see the batch means in batches it also accepting. Okay, so that's the miracle, not a miracle, that's the working of this input function. So that's why I'm always telling ki inference function are so useful. So what it is doing, whatever request body that I am passing, it is converting into the data frame. So no matter how I can pass 100 or 1000, it will be treated as a data frame. So that's why it is working in the batches as well. Otherwise it can only take a one record at a time, but now it's taking more than one record. So that's how it's working. Now I am happy with API, but still it is not deployed. So there is a one click that I only need to do, deploy API. If you can see here action, click on deploy API, stage, click on new stage. I would like to give name as a stage 1, deploy. Yeah, so this is my URL. If I'm clicking on this URL, I will get shock message missing authentication token. So API gateway is a most secure way, means it is a secure, and you will get some, means you should pass the authentication token. But actually this is not a right URL, because if you remember, I have created resources something like dev, so you should write dev here, then your API will work. But here in browser always you will get a missing authentication token. So if you can see here post, so this is your right URL. Okay, so how, if I'm going to click on this, still I will get a missing authentication. But let's check from the Postman. So I'm pasting this URL Postman. See, now in last session I have given the AWS authorization, but now this is REST API, I don't need to have any authorization. I'm just selecting no auth. A response body I'm giving just like that. In headers, content type should be text CSV, otherwise it will not work, because our inference function can only handle text CSV. If you want, you can handle application JSON as well. You just need to give some conditions like if, elif, application JSON, numpy. If you want your API is more convenient, then you can use. So I'm just clicking on send. Let's see what response we are get. And now you can see my API is working. If you can see the response, prediction 3. Let's pass the multiple request body 5. I have sending the 5 rows at a time. You can see now 5 responses I get. So now this API is able to handle the production workload as well, because now there is nothing regarding AWS Boto3 dependencies are there. See, let's write some Python code to call this API. Okay, so let's write a Python code. So I already have the Python code. So as of now I'm going to use a request library, request URL. We need to provide our API gateway URL just like this. So how I got this code? So thanks to the Postman, you can directly click on this code button. It will automatically generate the Python code that you can use. Just copy it here. Headers, as I said, header should be text CSV. So in payload you need to pass a string data request.request, but our request should be post method. So pass your URL, headers and data and run it. So you will get 3 as of now, because we have nothing, just because this is very similar like older one. So I hope now you know the meaning of a REST API. So in conclusion, I'm just going to repeat what we have done. We have created our SageMaker endpoint from the tutorial 1 notebook. We have created some inference function that we have changed from the training script. So this is the inference function that support text CSV. Now then we created Lambda function. Lambda function should handle all the data that we are getting from the API gateway. Now after the creation of Lambda function, we attach permission and roles to our Lambda function. We have given the environment variable name here, means it should be our endpoint name. Now we created API gateway, then we created dev resource, we created post method, then we attached our endpoint from here. And if it is working, then what I have done, just deploy this API, and now my API is in production. So how to get actual URL? Just click on this post method, whatever your resource, and you can copy this URL, and you can either make it a call from the Postman, or either you can, if it is a production application, so you can use your whatever application, Node.js, Python or Kotlin or Android application, no matter, you can do a call from that only. So we can see our Python code is also working. So now I'm happy because my production REST API is ready. Now my machine learning model is into the production. Now I don't need to worry for Boto3 dependency. I don't need to pass a signature and all other stuffs, right? So that's all for today's video. If you like this video, don't forget to like and share, and don't forget to subscribe my Machine Learning Hub YouTube channel. So I will come with the more SageMaker tutorials in future. So thanks for the listening me. See you into the next one. And remember my words, don't forget to delete all the resources that you created, otherwise you will incur a large amount of a cost. And guys, for you, I am creating all the resources in my account. You can see this is my own account. So for creating videos, I'm paying charges for all these resources, because AWS is not a free. Okay, so guys, thank you for the listening. See you into the next one. Yeah, bye.